Anger gets a really bad rap, but what if it is one of the most powerful tools for healing and transformation? Anger isn't the enemy, it's a messenger. And today, we're learning how to listen. Bonjour, and welcome back to Blumera Podcast. I'm your host, Brienne, and today we are diving into a topic that affects all of us. Anger, whether it's something you struggle to express, something you've been shamed for feeling, or something you simply don't know how to navigate. Anger is an emotion that carries so much more depth than we realize. Joining me is Alistair Moes, an internationally recognized anger management expert, therapist, and an author. With over 3 decades of experience, Alistair has worked with everyone from Olympic athletes and corporate executives to individuals facing homelessness, proving that anger doesn't discriminate. Through his work at Moes Anger Management, he helps people move beyond reactive patterns and transforms their relationship with this powerful emotion. In this episode, we'll talk about what anger really is and why it's often so misunderstood. We'll talk about the connection between anger, trauma, and emotional wellness, as well as how we can shift from reacting to responding, and practical strategies for navigating anger in a healthy and empowering way. Alistair's approach is all about curiosity, compassion, and respect, helping us uncover what's really beneath our anger, whether it's pain, sadness, fear, or something else entirely. If you've ever struggled with expressing anger or felt disconnected from it, then this episode is for you. Let's get straight into the call. First, I kind of want to dive into understanding anger, what it is and why it matters. I'm curious how you view anger in general, if you view it as positive, negative, or somewhere in between.
I see it as data. So it's information. And first and foremost, it is physical. So the emotions happen physically in our bodies, and then we interpret it. So a lot of men, myself included, grew up with a father who just didn't show a lot of emotion. And literally, my dad thought, well, you don't need to be sad. Like the emotions were kind of seen as irrelevant, but all of us feel the whole range of emotion, whether we're aware of it or not. But like anger is like heat rising up, or the constriction in the chest is often connected with fear or shame or powerlessness around the solar plexus, sometimes in the throat even, or overwhelm up in the forehead. And a lot of the time, men will just experience some discomfort in their body and they'll get angry, regardless, whether it's sadness or frustration or jealousy or anything else. It's just many of us learned growing up that you can't show anything except for anger. So the anger rises up. And if we're aware of it, if we notice, guys come back to session 2 in the group and they go, because their homework for session 2 from session 1 is notice what happens in your body and do that without judgment, just with curiosity. Just investigate the sensations in your body. And the more connected you are with your own physicality, the more you can connect with somebody else's. So we need to be able to feel that emotion. And so the anger, if we notice it, then we can, what I like to tell the guys to do is, first thing you do is you shut your mouth and then you listen. Shutting your mouth also forces you to breathe through your nose and kind of forces you to listen. But when we breathe through our nose, the air is conditioned by our sinuses so that our lungs can get up to 20% more oxygen out of it. So that seems to help. So I say, if you can just close your mouth and breathe in for 6 and out for 6, real slow, that forces you to pause. And so if we pause when the anger hits us, then we can not react. If we don't pause, then we just react. And then we're usually not very intelligent in our response and end up building up regret. So we can do something destructive, which is why I've worked with many thousands of men and women. If we don't pause, or if we just get too overwhelmed, or there's just too much stress in our bodies and sleeplessness and hunger and all that other fun stuff. And then we just lose our ability to see that big picture. However, and I think every big shift in the history of the world started with anger. Gandhi, probably kind of pissed off at the British occupying India, did a lot of nonviolent stuff, very specifically made a big shift. If we're angry at our boss or at our partner, if we take our time, we think it through, we can connect with the hurt or the pain or the whatever the suffering is that we're experiencing and figure out what to do with that so that we look at what we can do, how we can respond wisely, and whether it's about politics or, racism or civil rights or whatever it might be, it's when people feel that anger and there's this life energy in it, and it can move us to act courageously and wisely if we take our time. But we need to take that pause and access our intelligence and our heart and the wisdom in our body. Because if we just react, then it's just the ego and really this very ancient part of our brain. It's just fight or flight, all or nothing, life or death. So it's super dramatic, and we need to put our feet back on the ground so that we can respond wisely. So anger is neither good nor bad. It's true of every emotion that we can do something constructive or destructive with it, in my opinion.
I love that. And I love the note about the power of the pause. I think there is a lot of power in that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so important. And I think when we watch TV or movies, nobody ever pauses. Nobody ever says, hmm, let me think about that for a minute, or I'll get back to you in an hour or sometime later today because I'm really triggered by that and I I want to pause. That's the adult part of us responding rather than just reacting. But in you know social media or in movies or TV or whatever, people always have the answer right away. Like there nobody ever pauses at all because dead airspace doesn't make for good films, apparently.
I agree. There would be a lot of lessons gained in modeling that, though. But I get the dead
Yeah.
air. What are some common misconceptions about anger?
Well, a lot of the time women grow up learning that, as little girls, that anger is bad. And sometimes boys or girls or whoever grow up learning that anger isn't safe to express. So it feels dangerous. So if people are really angry around you or there's chaos around you, sometimes people will learn to act out and join into the chaos, but sometimes they'll learn that you can't ever show anger. It's dangerous. And so sometimes people equate anger with danger, or they equate anger with aggression. So they conflate the two as if anger means that you're going to do harm to somebody. But anger is the guardian of our boundaries. We experience anger when somebody crosses our boundaries or harms us or somebody we care about or something we care about. Anger rises up, as I said, as this life energy that motivates us. But if you grew up and, most of us grow up and experience some kind of trauma, trauma happens because something bad happens to us as a kid and nobody helps us process it. So something bad happens and we can neither fight nor flee because we're little, we're vulnerable, we don't have the power to do anything about it. And then it just sits in us and we interpret it at that age. So when I was 4 years old, we were living in South America, and all of a sudden, my dad got myself and my older brother on a plane. This was in like 1965, just to date myself. And we flew to Holland where he left us with my aunt and uncle. Now, they did have a really big house and they had three boys and like, we weren't hard done by. But as a little kid, something bad happens like that, and you just make that about yourself. I don't know what I did, but I better not make another mistake because who knows what'll happen, right? 6 months away from your parents, kind of traumatizing. And of course things happened that led to all that, but I won't get into all that. So I made that anger like, well, I better not get angry because that could be dangerous. So then I turn into kind of a nice guy, but really the anger would just build up and then I'd explode, which is what a lot of nice guys go to anger management because they didn't really learn what to do with the anger. And a lot of women, I had a woman and she calls me up and she's like, I'm breaking all this shit. Like, I don't know what's happened, but over the last year, I've just started like just reacting and breaking things. And I said, this is good. I mean, not that you're breaking things, but you're moving some of the anger. And clearly, talking with her, that anger had been in her for a long, long time. And when we hold the anger in, it trashes our immune system, which is why a lot of women end up with these sort of mystery illnesses like fibromyalgia and all sorts of stuff like that, autoimmune disease, which is like 90% of that happens to women. And if we don't have access to our anger, then like our immune system gets trashed. The anger is necessary to take a stand, to defend ourselves in a way that's meaningful, and then our body works better. Our body's not so happy if we can't show the anger. So it's just most of us, myself included, did not learn what to do with anger growing up because either it was over the top, mostly from my mom, or my dad would just never show anything, or it would just turn into manipulation or twisted things around. And regardless, nothing ever got resolved. So anger is there really to move us to step into, some courage and face the difficult things. But I didn't really learn that growing up. So I had a lot of learning to do, especially after I started running anger management groups 30 years ago.
I believe that. There's always learning and teaching.
Right.
I love that you mention the physical effects that suppressing anger can have. I have autoimmune disorder and stress disorder after a sexual assault, and trying to be silent and keeping my anger in. It wasn't until expressing it that I really was able to start to heal a lot of that. I still have it, but I don't have as many episodes, I guess, coming up.
You're changing how you hold that in your body. And so I do a lot of gestalt work with people. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
So I'll have a group of guys. We'll stick with guys on this one, but every few months I have a group of guys and we'll go to my office in downtown Vancouver and they'll sit around in these big comfy chairs and I put a couple of chairs in the middle and usually we'll just do a check-in and some guy's kind of vibrating off his chair because he's got something going on. And I'll say, all right, well, let's just go for it. And something has happened in his life where he has overreacted or underreacted. And I'll say, all right, so sit in the chair and you're going to have a conversation with this part of you that overreacted or underreacted or didn't speak up or whatever it might be. Usually there's an example, usually a recent example, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I'll say, so imagine you're able to look at this part of you. What's the emotional age that operates from? And sometimes he'll say 18 or 25 or what have you. I said, okay, if an 18 or 25-year-old acted like that, would that be immature? And then usually we get down to like, okay, maybe 2 years old or 6 years old or something like that. I go, all right. So you see he's triggered in that moment, but he's able to talk to you. And what do you notice about his body language or her body language? What do you notice about the look on his face? And if you can look into his eyes, what would you see? I say, okay, you're gonna complete a sentence that I start. You don't have to say the words again. I'll say, what I notice about you is, and I said, and your higher self, you're connected to your heart, your head, your body, you're grounded. compassionate. And what I notice about you is that you look really shut down, head down, shame, things like that. I say, okay, switch. I'm going to have him move to the other chair, and I'll start another sentence. I'll say, of course I'm shut down because, and he'll come up with an answer from that 4-year-old place, and it usually really hits home. And what it feels like in my body right now is maybe the chest, maybe the solar plexus. I'll say, oh, so what's it like in the solar plexus there? Is there an image? Is there a shape? Usually it's like a ball, might be heavy, might be empty. How does that impact your breathing? And what we're doing is we're getting deeply connected with that trauma as it sits in his body. And we're not judging it, we're just noticing it. And that ball in there, does it have a color, a texture, etc.? I go into a bunch of detail. And if it had a voice, what would it say? Or maybe it would just make a noise, a sound. And he'll go into whatever it might say. And we do a bunch of that. But by the end of it, I say, okay, so you're looking at your 4-year-old, and he says, what I really need right now is, and usually they get to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to be loved, to be kept emotionally and physically safe. Then I switch back to the adult, I just carry on with that. It's like, okay, what I'm going to do when I see that you're shut down is listen, all this other stuff, so that he connects with the physicality of what's in his body, because we can't heal the trauma which is behind the anger or the shutdown unless we actually feel it all. So the more he connects with that, the more insight he has into his own healing. Most people can do that. Like, I work with a lot of, construction longshoremen, but also doctors and nurses and, like people from every walk of life. Anger does not discriminate. It's in all of us in one way or another. And so if we can dive into what's behind it, then we can make all sorts of things happen. I mean, we understand ourselves differently, then we're more likely to heal.
Gotta feel it to heal it.
Yep, you got that one. Yeah.
So, how can we become more aware of our triggers and the patterns that anger shows up in?
Well, notice wherever you get defensive. Notice wherever you defend, deny, deflect, wherever you blame, judge, criticize, all of that is leaving us powerless because we can't change other people. I mean, we can't even like completely change ourselves or be in charge of ourselves. We can become more in charge of ourselves. We can create change within ourselves, but that takes a lot, usually. And I think usually it's a lifelong thing where we develop practices and do things that help us learn for, through our whole life, because there's always more. I'm 63 and I'm always doing stuff. I have this guy who sort of does fascial stretch energy work, and he can see what happens internally in your body and help release some of that stuff. I'd like to go to breath work events because the breath connects us deeply with the body and gets us out of our head. I think the healing has to include the body. Without really connecting deeply with the body, we're just in the shallows.
So, how do we know what's underneath? I know that sometimes anger, at least I've heard, can be a mask for other emotions, maybe grief,
Sure.
shame. I'm curious, how can you start to understand what's underneath once you identify it?
Well, usually when people come to see us, somebody has died within the last year, or they lost a job, or they changed jobs, or there's been some significant shift. Their partner cheated on them, or some big emotional event, or often even a series of emotional events. Somebody got injured on the job, or otherwise somebody lost the ability to do what they used to be able to do. Lots of brain injuries, concussions. So there's always all sorts of stuff around the person before they show up. And so it's getting to know what are all the things that led me down this path. And this is not to blame other people or events, it's to understand. So there's the current circumstances, and then there's stuff that happened over your lifetime. If I spend, any amount of time with somebody, usually I'll say something like, well, what was happening around your mom when you were in utero? When you were in your mama's belly, was it like totally chilled and a little Mozart in the background and butterflies and unicorns and stuff? Or was it chaotic? Did she feel unsafe? Like what was going on? Were they moving? Because our emotional foundation happens, the foundation begins in utero, right? In utero, we are like completely safe. Or so it seems, right? We're like swimming in this amniotic fluid. Somebody else is literally eating for you and breathing for you. It's climate controlled. Right?
So wonderful.
And and hopefully mom is feeling good. Hopefully, mom is feeling heard and seen and valued and loved and supported and emotional and physical safety. If all of that is going on and she feels inspired by her life, hey, this is a great environment. However, many of us, there was chaos going on. There was all sorts of stuff going on around her. She was feeling guilty about this or ashamed of that. Like my mom died 45 years ago when I was 18, and she took this secret to the grave with her, which I didn't learn about until I was 40 and found out that I had a half sister, right? Which honestly isn't that unusual of a story. Once I started telling people, a ton of people go, "Oh yeah, well," and then they have their own story. So what happens in utero, that's where like this becomes our normal and it's our comfort zone. We don't remember any of this stuff. We have no language. And what happens after being born, of course, has a big impact. But then we grow up and then we're attracted to this one person when there's all these other people around and we meet them and we hang out with them and it's like we feel like we know them at some deep level. It just like we spend a little bit of time with them and we have this deep connection. And then possibly the people spend a lot of time together. Maybe they have kids, maybe not, whatever. But at some point, they'll stop and go, oh my God, we became our parents. Like the dynamic that was around the mother just gets recreated. And usually that's with the father and that dynamic, you can see it spread throughout family relationships, uncles, aunts, a lot of the same types of things or the same type of dynamics. And the person's partner goes, oh, yeah, well, mine was similar, maybe not exactly the same, might have been more addiction or less addiction or whatever was involved. But it's not until we become aware of this that we can do something with it. And this is, again, not to blame the mother, it's to understand what happened. And then we can go back farther. And for instance, my father was between the ages of 7 and 12 during the Second World War in Holland. And Holland was occupied by the Nazis for 5 years. So my father's dad, my Dutch grandfather, my opa, he spent 5 years as a prisoner of war. He was in the military. He was at a higher level, and you know they lost their dad. They had a really nice house, which the Nazis really liked. So they lost their house. Then after, just nobody talked about it. It's just like really like nobody talked about it, and so nothing ever got healed. And so then my Opa ends up being pretty distant from his sons but a total control freak. And then that keeps on going downhill and it ends up in my body. So what happened to my father, my grandfather, my mother changes their DNA. And then that ends up being in me in one way or another. It can be healed, but it's like this stuff really gets sent down to us from previous generations. Some people say back 7 generations. And then if we want to take up the courage to really face this stuff, which is not easy, then we can change the next 7 generations. So I feel like when I heal the pain in me that can go back generations, I'm honoring the pain of my father, my mother, my grandfather. And I'm also honoring the lives of, I have a couple of kids, the people that are going into future generations. So, I mean, it makes sense that this is not the easiest thing to do to heal because it's really powerful. It isn't just about our healing, it's about our history and, the future.
I appreciate that you mentioned the 7 generations too. I'm Indigenous, and that's one of the
Yeah.
philosophies or beliefs within there.
Hmm.
So, I also, before we go to your family, because I do have questions about that, I'm curious. You mentioned you have children. I have children as well. What can we do for children to help them develop a healthier relationship with anger?
First of all, we give them the experience of emotional and physical safety, and we give them the experience of being really fully heard and seen and valued. They feel all that, they feel loved, then emotional safety is created. And then we feel secure in our own skin. We feel secure being true to ourselves. And we value our words. Okay, nobody listened to me growing up. So so it was, that was just not what happened. At that time, parents were much less likely. But it's interesting because I worked with one guy who grew up with this really famous father, and he'd be like 8 years old, and he would sit at the dinner table with all these really high-powered people around. There were artists and things like that, and they would listen to him. They always wanted to know what he thought about these things. So he grew up with these powerful people being really interested in his voice and what he thought about things. And so he carried that into a life that, a lot of people ended up wanting to hear what he had to say. And he had a very successful career because that just felt, you know, right for him. So what we do for our kids is all of that. And when they act out is to help them. You're right. When I went through divorce, I talked with my kids about pain that, like pain is there for a reason. Don't avoid it. You want to feel it. Like, so we could talk about that. We could have tears together and talking with the teachers at their school. They said, well, we see lots of kids go through divorce, and I couldn't really tell with your kids. Like some, it has this really big impact. And fortunately, I mean, it had a big impact on them. There's no question, but it didn't turn into them acting out in their daily life or shrinking or like one client a little while ago, and I think it was the first session, and he talked to me about his son just not making eye contact with people. And they mentioned that in the daycare that he wouldn't make eye contact. And I said, so I'm giving you homework. Over the next while, when it's time for dinner, you don't say, hey, so and so, come on, time for dinner. You walk over to him, put your hand on his shoulder. You say, hey, it's time for dinner. Let's go eat. So you connect with them physically, and you know, you do that every time you part ways or when you reconnect. And so you want to make sure you've got this eye contact with him on a regular basis because that way he feels seen and heard and valued, and you're creating this emotional safety. And literally, he came back 2 weeks later and says, wow, that worked. Like he's looking people in the eye all over the place now. I mean, I didn't know if that was gonna totally work or not, but like this guy, I think so many people get so wrapped up in just trying to survive and make enough money. Parents will work long hours and be stressed and all of that kind of stuff. So we lose ourselves in the overwhelm of all of that. and we lose connection with what really matters to us. And I think when people come to see us, they they lost themselves. So part of the work we do, is just reconnecting them to what really matters to them, their core values, their heart, so that they're more embodied, so that they notice what's happening in them. And there's all sorts of different things people can do around that, like, the breathing exercises that we have people do. And I lead people through square or box breathing, which has been around probably for thousands of years. I've been teaching it to guys for 25 years. And 25 years ago, if I said to a group of guys, hey, how many of you have ever done like a breathing exercise or practiced meditation or something? Maybe one guy puts his hand up. Now it's almost always well over half of the group. Things are changing. Like this is, just much more common. And so men are more open to these things. And I want them to see that in each other because that speaks volumes. And then to hear each other come back to the next session and go, wow, that actually made a really big difference when I stop and breathe, or when I do this square breathing or what have you, then I'm smarter. Because, I mean, that's really like you're smarter, you're more heart connected, and then you feel better because you're acting more yourself. And we want our children to learn to be true to themselves, because that's not what I learned growing up, right? And a lot of people didn't learn that growing up. So it's being aware of that, getting to know that part of me that goes to shut down, or that voice in my head that says, "Oh, it doesn't matter. You don't need to do that. It won't make any difference for them anyway." It's like, well, actually, yeah, I'm their dad. It will make a difference. Although I got to admit, I actually use Chat GPT. Like my son last year graduated from university, and I had to go into Chat GPT, and it's like, okay, as a dad, what am I supposed to do if my son graduates? Because my dad didn't do that stuff, right? I
Yeah.
didn't even go to my graduation. It's whatever, doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And it's like, actually, it does matter. And, many of us, whatever happened growing up, that's sort of what we carry into the world. However, we were parented, that's how we're most likely to parent. And then we're run by our history rather than by what really matters to us. So I think the anger management is just, or the therapeutic work is just connecting people with who they are, then you'll be fine. I
Hmm.
mean, relatively, it's a long process. It's not like, snapping your fingers or anything.
Hmm. So I know you mentioned working with a client, a female client who was breaking things. And I'm
Yeah.
curious how anger is, I guess, a two-part question. When we're raising children, how anger can be addressed differently with genders, knowing what we know about how society and what we've been taught, and then also how that comes out later on as an adult differently for each gender.
Boys end up learning that they're not supposed to show any emotion, like that's for girls, except for anger. And little girls are taught, well, you can show all the other emotions, but not anger, right? So it's very different. Meanwhile, we have pretty much the same internal stuff going on. I mean, women's bodies are a lot more complicated because you guys can grow babies and stuff, and guys don't have all that, which is, there's a lot to it. So I think men's bodies are a little bit simpler. But growing up, I mean, we have pretty much the same wiring around the emotions, mostly, right? And I think that women don't learn the same things. So, like this woman who was breaking things needed to connect with the energy that was in her, and connect with where that came from in her past. Part of that would be where she learned that she wasn't allowed to do that, why she repressed that for so many years. And so it's connecting with that little girl who learned that it was dangerous or unsafe to express anger. And potentially we could connect with a time where that happened and what it felt like in that little girl. And when we do that, it's not like we're going back in time. We're connecting with what happens in her body right now in this moment and becoming more aware of it. means that you become more aware of yourself. And we can change how we relate to that by attending to it, by turning toward this. A lot of the time, people would feel this uncomfortable stuff and they would drink or make jokes or eat or whatever it might be to just not feel the uncomfortable stuff. But really, it's like we need to turn toward it. We need to feel all of it, and then we can look after that within ourselves. But I think our society in general is like pain avoidance. If we avoid all the pain, then we stay emotionally immature. Like we need to feel all of it. If you have, that sort of dark night of the soul, which most of us have had maybe more than once or twice, then, you just allow yourself to feel all of it. And then you learn something from that. You sit with it without judgment and be able to experience all the discomfort, and maybe you write about it, maybe you talk about it, or both, and do so where it's safe to do that, then we become more familiar with this. And ideally, we connect with our history. What did our mother do? What was our parenting experience, etc. So it's always connecting the history in our family, in ourself, in our more immediate circumstances. Raising kids triggers all of this stuff because, they get to have temper tantrums. If you're 2 years old, it's okay. You're supposed to have a temper tantrum. When you're like 50 years old, yeah, it's not the same anymore, right? And yeah, we just need to connect and look after that part of ourselves and have people that we can talk with. In our women's groups, I think mostly in therapy, women are more likely to go to therapy, but not anger, right? We run more than twice as many men's groups than women's groups, or roughly twice as many. And women, whenever they call up, and I'll say, really, it's like this lovely group of women, and they're a courageous group because they're willing to look at this stuff. They feel terrible because they've hurt people around them, and they don't want to do that anymore. So they're more afraid to stay the same than to jump into this group because our society thinks an angry woman is some crazy lunatic, which, it's like women aren't allowed to feel anger or they just get judged and criticized. You can see that in sports and tennis and all sorts of things. The guy does the exact same thing as a woman and she gets said that she's unhinged and a lunatic, and he's passionate and angry. Or, the joke about, what's the difference between a man being assertive and a woman being assertive? Well, the woman gets called a bitch, typically. Like, I mean, not by everybody, of course, and things are changing, well, possibly for the better in that area, that we need women's voices and strong voices for a healthy society. We need to have everybody needs to be heard and seen and valued. Yeah, and so the more we can be the example of that, then our kids learn and grow from that. But I think women, benefit so much from talking about their anger if they can find a constructive place to do that. Doesn't do any good to just to go and complain and judge and criticize, right? That leaves us powerless. But if we can really want to understand and can be compassionate with ourselves and others, then lots is possible. I spent part of the end of one of the last groups with the guys just talking about like what's compassion. Most guys don't know what compassion is. Now they have sort of some loose idea, but it's like valuing somebody as an equal and feeling with them. You're not trying to fix them. You're just able to be with them and, as they say, hold space. So it's not sympathy where you're like, I feel sorry for you. You're like, we're equals and we walk side by side and we both end up feeling pain and I can feel your pain and I'm with you, right? You're not alone. That's compassionate. A lot of us guys didn't get that compassion growing up. If you cried, it was like, that's just going to make things worse. So We just learn to suck it up. Whereas women might cry, but they don't really get as many opportunities, I think, to be really heard and seen and valued in their anger or for their anger, which it would make sense that women would actually have more anger than men, given how our society in general treats them. Turn that anger into something constructive, and that's powerful.
I appreciate you acknowledging that. And I agree. And I like how it all kind of comes back to understanding your history too, and understanding where that comes from in order to be able to move forward and change that. Thank you so much for being here and for your courage, your compassion, your vulnerability. I gained a lot from it, and I definitely hope that my listeners will as well.
I appreciate your presence and your questions and yeah, your openness. Like it's really clear. Like you can hear this stuff and it touches you. You allow it to touch you in a way that's like, oh yeah, you can relate to it. So I appreciate the healing that you have done.
Thank you. That means a lot to hear.